This is a story that I will never forget about writing for magazines, and I hope that this is helpful for you too. So, a long time ago, many, many years ago, I heard this story. I heard about this where there were two writers and they had about the same skill level, they had about the same quality of writing. And one of those writers worked at this magazine for 50 cents a word, and one of those writers worked in a magazine, the same magazine, for $1.25 a word. So when I heard this disparity, this really stayed with me. Like, I will never forget that story of learning that there were two writers who were, basically the same quality. They had basically the same kind of work, and they were making crazy different amounts of money. And why was that? I mean, I don't know specifically why that was, but I can tell you from my own experience why. And it's because they didn't know how to ask for a rate raise from their magazine client, or when they should ask for a rate raise from their magazine client. So today we're going to go over how to do that. But I'm hoping that story sticks with you. It's a really important one to know, because this is the difference between like writers knowing their value and knowing their worth, and how things end up turning out with different types of clients, like businesses versus magazines, and really how how and why you should negotiate your rates and pay attention to what's going on in the industry. That's really important. So today we're going through a few really important things. All right. So I have a bunch of notes here that we're going to go through. The first thing, number one, and we're also going to do some pup dates. So before we do number one, which is up there now, we'll do a quick pup date because they're over there looking cute and snuggly. So I don't know, I'm hoping that they'll sleep most of the time. I mean, I know that the loud one is snoozing right now. She's being wiggly. Uh-oh. Oh no, she's looking. Yeah. Anyways, usually she makes a lot of noise. Oh no, now she knows. It's okay. Okay, we got to pan away. Pan away. All right. So hopefully she'll be not borky right now. So number one thing, the first thing we're going to talk about is the multiple different steps that you can take to start out at higher magazine rates, and then also really increase your rates politely and in a nice way over time. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that when you kind of start out with magazines, they are going to give you a few specific things. So they're basically going to say, our normal rate is this, our traditional rate is this, our starting rate is this. There's some kind of language that they use that they're like, hey, this is the basic rate. Like, not the super premium unleaded. This is the basic rate. And every time, and I started doing this with my magazine clients, and it works out really well. Every time you get a new magazine client, you can ask them if they have any wiggle room in their budget to up the rate. This is really important. So this is how someone gets stuck at 50 cents a word, and someone starts, maybe at 80 or 90 cents a word and works their way up to $1.25, or starts at $1 and works their way up to $1.25. So every time you get a new magazine client, when they send you their rate, they're like, hey, we normally pay $400 for this piece, for whatever it is, an 800 word piece or whatever, 1,000 words. And you're like, oh, you know what? Thank you so much for sharing your rate information, or sharing, thanks so much for letting me know. Do you have any wiggle room in your budget to up the rate, right? That's the phrase that I always use. I wrote it down. So do you have any wiggle room in your budget to raise the rate? Or do you have any wiggle room in your budget to change the rate? Or any kind of nice way to say, like, is there an available, like, do you have availability to start at a higher rate? Hey, Vesna, welcome in. And this is super powerful. This is the difference. Like, someone who starts at 50 cents a word, it'll take them forever to negotiate up to $1.25. That takes so long. But if you start from the very beginning negotiating your rate, you can actually, get closer to that $1.25 a lot quicker. So let's say they're like, all right, this is your first article for us. We don't feel comfortable giving you $1.25. You kind of have to either prove yourself, or we need to see the quality of your work, or whatever. That's fine. You can still go from, like, let's say their traditional rate was 50 cents a word and you're starting at 80. That's a lot better starting point than 50 cents a word. Hey, Annie, welcome in. Annie, I hope you're feeling okay. I know you've been having some health stuff, so I'm hoping you're feeling all right. So here's the deal. Every time, say it with me, you get a new magazine client and they say this is, you know, we normally pay this for this. You say, that's nice. Thank you for letting me know. Do you have any wiggle room in your budget to up the rate? Now, here's the thing. When they come back and they say, no, this is our max budget, or no, we pay the, you know, the same across the board, you accept that, right? You can either accept that and say, okay, cool, I'm going to write this piece for $400, and I know now that the ceiling is $400. So as long as I work for this magazine, every time I write an article for them, it's $400. So that's good information to know. The other thing is you can just say, I totally get it, but my floor rate is 80 cents a word. Seems like we're not a fit. And then you move on. I hope that, and I'm going to impress upon you, is like, do not shame. Uh-oh, they're active. They're active. Oh, that's a cute tail wagberry. Good job. That's cute. Do not shame the magazine for their rates. Editors are really doing their best. Editors a lot of times work at magazines because they are passion projects, because they're things they really care about. Do not go back to them and be like, well, your rates are way too low for my work. Like, don't do that. You can just say like, hey, I totally get it. You know, my minimum for this type of work would be this. If you ever, you know, have a chance to reevaluate your budget, I would love to talk to you further about that, about working together. Do not do anything where you like try to say like, oh my gosh, I can't believe your pay is so low or whatever. Like, magazines are doing their best. And especially now, we all know there's been lots of magazines that have folded. It's been a really tough time for them. So I'm just trying to impress upon you that you can always ask for a rate raise. You can always be curious if there's room in their budget, so that you're not a 50-cent writer versus a $1.25 writer. But the whole thing is that you kind of have to work with what they give you. So magazines are working within whatever constraints, you know, they can afford. And whatever they give you, right? Like, even if you can up your rate over time, what they're giving you then is usually like their best offer. So they give you 400, you ask about wiggle room, they say yes or no, but don't go back to them and be like, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever. Like, I thought you would da da da. No, don't shame them or do anything like that. Because I know there are writers who like try to make editors feel bad and like basically neg them into giving them better rates. Don't do that. Hey, Marie, welcome in. Yeah, I know that chronic fatigue, man, Annie. That's rough stuff. So yeah, I hope you're doing okay. Hi, buddy. So that's the first thing, is every time you get a new magazine, you ask this question: do you have any wiggle room in your budget to up the rate, or do you have any wiggle room in your budget to raise the rate? Just leave it open, and they can give you a yes or no answer. But sorry, at least you're starting at the right place. You're starting with, you know, you're not starting at 50 cents. You're starting at, you know, whatever that is. There's also Who Pays Writers. So if you go to Who Pays Writers, it's a website. They'll show you this disparity in rates. So like Who Pays Writers is all about collecting rates. Why do you have to sit on her? She hates that. She hates when you go over there and you try, oh, now we're starting the raking. So if you go to Who Pays Writers, that is a giant catalog of all the rates that are available for different magazines. So writers go in there and they post rates and they say, hey, I'm getting paid $1.83, or I'm getting paid 33 cents, or I'm getting paid 57 cents, or I did print and online, or I only did print. There's all these details in there about what they did and how much it was priced at. So if you're ever looking at a magazine, go to Who Pays Writers and look at the disparity in rates. Look at what's available. Hi, Woo Woo. Why don't you go back to your hubba hole? I know he disrupted your whole hubba hole experience. Good girl. There you go. All right, here's your blankie. I've used Who Pays Writers all the time. So Who Pays Writers is great to like. It's great to understand what is available, how people are getting paid, the timeline that people are getting paid, all that stuff. Hi, Woo. Woo, you got to go back to your hubba hole. So those are the first things. Always ask that and check Who Pays Writers. Always ask, do you have any wiggle room in your budget for a rate raise or to increase the rate? And then always check Who Pays Writers. Now, not every magazine is in Who Pays Writers, but they have hundreds of them in there. Back to your hubba hole, please. Thank you. All right, now I'll give you a Treato. There you go. Okay. Hold on, everybody. We're going to do a quick pup date with some Treatos. Ugh. You're not even in your hobble hole. You left again. Oh my goodness. Hi, Vicky. Welcome in. I always love the wave. All right, here you go, buddy. Good job. Here you go, buddy. All right, Bean, you ready to show everyone your skills? Good girl. Other one. Other one. Other one. Good job. Those are nice high fives. Those are nice high fives today. All right. So number 2, we're going to go over our second thing that we're going to talk about. Hold on. We can do this. All right. Number 2. So number 2, the thing that we're going to talk about. Ugh, you guys slimed me today. I want to make sure I have everything in my notes because there's very specific things that I want to make sure we talk about. So those are the first 2 steps. And then the other thing is that when someone comes back to you, so your editor is coming back to you and saying, like, let's say you just turned in an article and they're like, oh my gosh, this article was the best, you know, like I loved your quotes, or I love this thing, or I was really happy with this is really great, like thank you so much for all your hard work, all that stuff. Then you can ask for a rate raise then as well. You're like, hey, I'm so glad you like the piece, and you can ask for a testimonial. That's a good time to ask for a testimonial. But when they come back and they tell you how much they love your work and how great it was, that's a good time to say, like, hey, you know, thank you so much. I so appreciate the kind words. You know, would you write a testimonial? Or you can say something like, hey, you know, like we've been working together for the past, you know, 2 months or 4 months or 6 months or however long, you know, and it seems like you really like my work. Do you have any wiggle room in your budget to up the rate? That's a good time to ask because they're already happy with your work. And that means that their readers are going to be happy with your work. The publisher is going to be happy with the work. They're going to get a lot of clicks, likes, or shares, or however they measure success of their work and their pieces. But that's always a good time. Like every time someone compliments your work or says something nice, or your editor is just like, wow, the edits you did were really great, or whatever, that's a good time to ask for a rate raise or a testimonial. And you can just use the same phrase. Do you have any wiggle room in your budget? Let's see. I want to make sure we go over these. Another good time to ask for a rate raise, and this is kind of in the same category, is you've been doing good work for them for several months. Like you've worked together for 6 months or more, or 4 months, or at least a quarter. Like you've submitted enough work to them that they have a good idea that you submit work on time, it's good work, and they like it. That's always a good time to ask for a rate raise, is like 6 months in. So you've already completed multiple assignments. Like don't complete one assignment and then wait 6 months and then ask for a raise. It's not how it works. You want to be someone who they can consistently go to create this type of content. You want to be someone that they feel they're happy to have you in their stable of writers. You're doing stuff that really helps them. You consistently deliver exactly what they need. That's a great time to ask for a rate raise, about 6 months in. All right. So now I want to go to the third part. So the third part of this is kind of like the double-edged sword piece. So when you are, number 3 here is when you're asking for a rate raise. Oh, and if you feel like this has been helpful so far, give it a thumbs up. If you feel like you want to learn more about writing for magazines or building a high-earning freelance writing business, subscribe. I should have a subscribe GIF. I should get one. Right? I should get a subscribe GIF. I should do that. Hi. You look like a tiny penguin. You're a tiny penguin. All right. The third thing. So this is really important. If you go in for a rate raise, you will accept what they are giving you. Okay? So here's the deal. When you ask for a rate raise, the thing is that you are... Either they tell you like, sorry, our max budget is 400, and you have to decide whether you want to accept 400 or you want to walk. The other thing is like, if someone comes back and they say like, we could give you a 5-cent raise or a 10-cent raise, sold, accept it. Like, it's really hard to then go back and be like, I would like a 25-cent raise. Like, nope, accept it. This is why at the very beginning you ask about upping the rate, because the increments of raises that you get are very small. So if you start at 50 cents and then you're like 60 cents, 65 cents, 70 cents, 75 cents, 80 cents, like that's forever. But if you started at 80 or 90 cents, then it's let's say you started at 80 cents, now it's 85, 90, 95, $1. You're a lot better off. So when they come back, I know, Woo, I know. Can you go back to your hobble hole? No, you don't want to? You just want to work at me? So when they come back with a raise, you say thank you and you are grateful for that, right? That's really important. Like, it is hard for them to move their budget around and to say, well, now I'm paying X for this piece. That is a lot for magazines. Like, you need to understand that a business has a lot more free flowing cash and a lot more chances to create revenue and income than a magazine. So when a magazine gives you a rate raise, you either accept it wholeheartedly and say thank you so much, or you decide, hey, this isn't going to work for me. It's been great working with you. I'm sorry, but I don't think this is going to work. If you go back and you're like, hey, you gave me a 15-cent raise, I want 20 cents. Like, I feel like that's kind of quibbling. And plus, you can always ask for another rate raise later. This is why you start at a higher rate. This is why you negotiate that from the very beginning, because doing that while you're already working with them, like, that's a lot more difficult than starting high and then, going up from there. The other thing that you want to remember about rate raises is that if you do an annual rate raise, so this is different. Going to a magazine and negotiating a rate with them and saying, do you have any wiggle room in your budget, right? They tell you it's 400. You say, do you have any wiggle room in your budget? That was a nice woo, Minnie. That was a nice woo. You get a Treato for that. Do you have any wiggle room in your budget for a rate raise? They give you the number, right? They say, okay, cool, we'll give you 500 instead of 400. You're like, sold. But if you go to your magazine client, here you go, buddy, and you tell them, hey, I'm doing an annual rate raise. Instead of accepting 400, I will now be accepting 500. And they come back to you and they say, I'm sorry, we can only give you 400. You have to leave. You have to, I'm telling you, this is like I'm laughing because, like, some people, I find this is a hard concept to get, but you have to stick with your integrity. This is not a negotiation tactic. If you go to your magazine and you say, my new rates for 2023 are this, does that work for you? And they say, no, you now have to leave. Because now if you don't leave, it looks like you faked it and you're like, oh, those aren't really my rates for 2023. I was just kidding so that I could force you to pay me more money. And then you're like, sure, I'll accept 400. Nope. You have to walk. You have to be, if you go in and tell them these are my rates now, you have to stick with that integrity of those are your rates now. If it doesn't work for them, it doesn't work for them. They're no longer your client. That is unfortunate. That's the difference. Now, if you want to keep this client, don't do the annual rate raise with them. Don't end up going to them and saying, these are my rates. If you want to keep the client, that's when you ask them, do you have any wiggle room in your budget to raise the rate? That allows them to say, okay, we can give you an X, we can give you this much more, or no, we can't do it. But if you go to them and tell them, like, if you go, like, you wouldn't go to the grocery store and be like, you wouldn't have like a fruit stand, right? You're selling peaches, which a lot of people do here because of Fredericksburg peaches. But anyways, if you were selling peaches, you wouldn't be like, my peaches are $1. That's my new rate raise. They used to be 75 cents. Now they're $1. And then someone would be like, no, I'm not paying $1. And you'd be like, sold 75 cents. No. You have to decide that. So when you're doing your annual rate raise, you can go to your client and you can either say, do you have any wiggle room in your budget, to increase going into 2023? Or, you can tell them, these are my rates. Does that work? If it doesn't, you got to walk. You can't get that integrity back. So if you say your rates are this, your rates are those, and you walk if it doesn't work. So that's really important to understand. So, the idea that you would like try to use that as a tactic, like, my rates are going up, accept it or else I'm leaving you. Like, no, you either say, like, this is how to work with me. This is what it costs now. And they say yay or nay. That's why I always like, do you have any wiggle room in your budget? Because that allows them to come back with a number. It allows you guys to have a good working relationship. It's not this like thing where you have to be ready to drop them. You can preserve the relationship. There's a lot of things. You can still preserve the relationship if you're like, hey, our rates don't match up anymore. But really, like, I think it's totally fine to ask them about wiggle room in their budget, but you have to stick with the idea that these are your new rates. Like, if those are your rates for 2023, that's it. So if you don't want to lose that magazine client, you either ask them about wiggle room in their budget or you deal with the rate that they're giving you. Here you go, buddy. Here you go, woo-woo. Woo-woo, can you go back to your hobble hole? Thank you. It was a good dog song. All right, let's do a quick pup date because she's being sassy. And I want to double check my notes. Because there's a lot of important things. Because, you know, talking with money with magazines is a different kind of beast than businesses in a way. So, all right. Can you go back to your hover hole? All the way back. Good job. All right. Can you show everyone your high fives? High five. Good girl. High five. Other one. Other one. Other one. The other one. You know. There you go. Good job. Here you go, buddy. Good job, guys. You guys look great. All right. So let's go to 4. So the last thing that we want to talk about is in these things. Go back to your hover hole, you sass. Go back to your hover hole. Sit. Good girl. Good boy, Barry. All right. So the last thing that I want to make sure that we talk about here is that basically there are some interesting things that always float around when we're talking about magazines. Let me make sure I change my number out because this is helpful, I think, for people going back through these videos to see that there's like different things. And I think it helps just track all the stuff. So number 4 that we're talking about here is that you can ask for a rate raise pretty much whenever. There are good times to do it, like when someone compliments your work or when you start working with a new magazine and you ask up front. But really, don't worry so much about pressurizing like there's a perfect time. There is no perfect time to ask for more money. Like it's not like you're like going to magically catch them. You're like, I caught them. They're going to give me more money. It's not how it works. So when you're thinking about asking for a rate raise, you always want to, like, that's why I like starting from the very beginning, asking like, hey, do you have any wiggle room in your budget to up the rate? Because then you kind of get an idea of like, what's kind of the floor here? What are they working with? Will they work with me? Like, what's kind of going on? That gives you a lot more landscape. Plus, you start the relationship with a kind of a negotiation, right? So you start with the idea that you're the type of writer that knows your value and your worth, and you're going to ask for raises. It's not going to be an out of the blue thing. So for me, when I think about it, it's like the worst thing that they can say to you is no, right? Like when I think about it, it's like from the very beginning, I'm a writer who pays attention to rate and I negotiate my rates. And the worst thing they can say is no, like this is our max budget or this is what we pay everybody regardless of experience or whatever. But at least you get information out of that, right? Like if they say no, they usually give you a reason why. Like, nope, we pay a flat $400 to everybody forever, all across the board. Or, you know, right now our budget is changing, so this is what we're sticking with. Or yes, we'll give you a 10-cent raise, or we'll give you $100 extra or whatever. But you at least have some idea of what's going on, and you have you kind of have this like framework to work within, and it's not like I think the other thing to think about is that you want to normalize the idea of talking about money. Like we're not just, most of us, I would say the majority of us are not just writing just because we're like, I would like to make $0 writing. And I was talking to my students about this. We talked about this the other day. And if you ever question money, go read Real Artists Don't Starve by Jeff Goins. And there's a story, and this is what we talked about. There's a story about Michelangelo. So Michelangelo was super rich. And I think if I remember from the excerpt one of my students posted is like, he had like $47 million. And people always have this idea that artists are starving, that they aren't, ow, you stepped on my foot with your claws. That artists are starving, that they shouldn't ask for more money, that there's this whole thing. But the truth is like most of the famous artists and most of the people that you know were like, this is how I put it, they're like ornamental lawn gnomes. So basically rich people back then would have people like Michelangelo or other famous artists just like live on their property rent free, and they would like give tours and be like, there's Michelangelo, right? Like that's kind of the ornamental lawn gnome. They're like, look, we picked one up. Stepping on my foot is not successful for you to get more treats. Right now it is because it hurts. So there's, right, this idea that there's the starving artist was actually popularized by this guy named Henry Murger, which he's French, so his name is probably like Henri Murger or something weird. So not that French people are weird. You know what I mean? Like if I just do the weird accent, I mean, the accent is weird. So Henri Henry Murger, right? HenriMurger. Henry Murger, but his name's probably Henri. He's the one that popularized the idea of the starving artist, and he romanticized a lot of poverty on purpose. But this guy, Henry, um, died penniless and had, like, he wasn't actually trying to, like, figure it out. So for some reason, Murger, whatever his name is, his idea from 1847 has just lived on. Let's forget about Michelangelo. Let's forget about all these other people. So between Michelangelo and Henri, there's about 200 years, right? So somewhere in this 200 years, we just kind of like erase the fact that artists, well-known artists, were like millionaires and had huge piles of money. And that was like normal. It wasn't like the Van Goghs and like the people who really struggled and the people who didn't have any money. That was actually like a much smaller portion. So somewhere from 1847, we all decided that we're like, Henry was right. We should all starve. That's the creative vision. And then it's just like continued to be popularized, right, by movies and like all this other stuff. And like, oh, if you want to make it, you got to like earn your stripes and do all this stuff. No, you don't. No, you don't. Like I said, I tell this story all the time, right? 50 cents a word and $1.25. $1.25 is not starving. And the other thing is that there are writers who got their very first, I have like a little nibbler down here. There are writers I know who got their very first clips in the New York Times, the Washington Post, like Travel and Leisure, like the biggest magazines that exist, right? And that was their very first clip. So the idea that we should all kind of like just accept the rate and that we should just be like, no, you should never ask for more money, or like, yeah. So all of that stuff, that's like a myth. The starving artist thing has always been a myth. It was fiction to begin with. It was started by this guy in 1847. If you ever feel upset about this myth, you could be upset at Henri. That's my new favorite person, I guess. But yeah, it's not a thing. So when you're kind of thinking about all of these, like asking for more money, it's okay. Most of us are in this, right? That's how I started this whole diatribe, was most of us are in this to make a living while we write. We want to write. That's what we want to do. Like that's our career of choice. And we would like to have some money doing that, right? Very rarely are there writers who are able to just write and not make, like they have to make literally $0. Like at every point, they're like, no, you don't have to pay me. Like that doesn't happen. Like even people who don't need the money, like they have, enough income, or they have some other situation, they're still getting paid for their writing. So the idea that we shouldn't talk about money as writers is crazy, and we should always talk about it. We should normalize it. Like this is something else that I think is really helpful. When you don't get paid by a magazine, or when you don't get paid by someone, their salary is still getting paid. So when you're worried about paying for kibbles, or when you're worried about how you're going to, pay your bills or pay your rent or pay your heat in the winter, everybody else is getting paid. Okay? This is why we need to talk about money more. There's like this, we like forget. We're like, oh my God, should I go to the magazine? They haven't paid my invoice. Like, I don't want to be annoying. They're all eating turkey. Like while you're worrying about how to pay for kibbles, like they're having their nice holiday dinner. They're getting their paychecks, right? They're going about their business. And, hold on. And they're still getting money while you are worried about the $600 check that they haven't sent you that you really need, right? That's a big disparity. And I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. Like, oh, now I have to sneeze. Hold on. Okay. Yeah, so the deal is that we should talk more about money. We should talk more about what we get paid and how we can make money, because there are lots of writers who make plenty of money. And the idea that you shouldn't follow up on an invoice, or that like you have signed a contract and they owe you money and they didn't pay it, everybody else who is on the opposite side of that contract is all getting paid. Everybody. And you are not. Okay, you stepping on my toes really hurts. Ouch. So I think that's something that's really important to remember, is that you are there's nothing wrong with asking about money or asking for more money or knowing your worth or knowing where your boundary is of what you will and won't accept from any type of client, including magazine clients. So hold on, let's do a quick pup date so I can get you. Can you go back to your hubble hole? Go back to your hubble. All the way back. First, you gotta give me a high five. All right, now the other one. High five. Other one. Good job. I don't know why you're trying to high five my forearm instead of my hand. That seems a lot more difficult to do. Here you go, buddy. You're an all-star today, Bear. You're doing great. Good job, buddy. High five. Good job. All right. Okay, let's check my notes. Let's see what's going on. So you can always talk about money. You can always ask about wiggle room in their budget. The worst thing they can ever say to you is no, and it's totally okay to walk away if you decide that that's not a fit for you. It's totally okay to, say you have an annual rate raise and someone says, sorry, that doesn't work for us. And you're like, all right, I guess that's it. Like, we just, we're not a fit anymore. Everybody has those boundaries. Everybody should have those boundaries of what you will and won't accept as a writer. And those change over time. Like at some point, right, when you got paid $400 a story, you're like, sweet, $400. I used to be getting paid $100. And at some point you start getting paid $600, $700, $800, $1,000 or more. And you're like, $400 feels really low now. Maybe that's not a fit for me anymore. So I think I just want to encourage everybody that these rate raises, there are times and places to ask for them, but you can always ask for them. We can always discuss money. It's okay to normalize that. And remember, like, everybody's getting paid when you're not. And the people, there's a big disparity sometimes in what people get paid. So I think that's really important to pay attention to. Oh no, my notes, they've ran. Okay, here we go. Let's see. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about. So let's go to number 5. So this is our last thing that we're going to talk about. So we already talked about a whole bunch of other steps and how to ask for things, when to ask for them, what to do when you're starting out. So here's the deal. When we're working for magazines, sometimes what you'll end up realizing is that you collect too many magazine clients. And this was something that I did. So when I burned out in 2018 in spectacularly weird fashion, surprisingly enough, if you've heard the Dairy Queen story or the burnout story where I was like, I'm going to work at Dairy Queen instead. They're actually building a brand new Dairy Queen near me now. So who knows? Maybe I'll be their new soft serve person. Anyways, so the deal is that, where was I going with that? I had an idea that I wanted to make sure I told everybody about. Oh, too many magazine clients. There we go. So there are times, so when I burned out in 2018, I worked for too many magazines. Like what ends up happening sometimes is over time, you end up collecting too many magazine clients and they all pay you little bits, $400 here, $1,000 here, $200 here, $800 here. It's not the same thing as working with a business where they have like an ongoing regular need. Most magazines, like especially print ones, like they have a print schedule and they need X amount of stuff. It's not the same as like an online publication that might publish 20 stories a day. Like that really depends. Sometimes you'll get 2 stories per month and that just goes on. But if you're doing a regular blogging engagement with a business, that can be 4 posts per month and that can last for 3 months. There's a difference. So when I burned out, it was like I was collecting all these little bits of money from tons of different magazines. And this is something you have to be careful with. And this has to go with rate raises. If you don't ask for rate raises and I hear you. If you don't ask for rate raises and you end up collecting too many little things, what ends up happening is you end up working a ton and not making a ton of money. So you end up in this weird space where you feel like you're working all the time, but you're just not being compensated well. So you have to be very particular about the magazines that you do and don't work with. So yes, as you're starting out, as you're a baby freelance writer or a beginning freelance writer, yes, say yes to a lot of things. Get experience, understand what you like, work with a lot of different places, but then start being more discerning about who you work with. Because if you start collecting too many magazines and too many things, what ends up happening is you have like 30 clients or 25 clients and it's just like a little bit here and there instead of having something like 3 to 5 clients plus a handful of magazines that you write for at random, right? So A long time ago, like when I first started out, so like 10 years ago, I knew a lot of writers, well, not a lot, but I knew a bunch of writers who only worked for magazines. But now all of those writers have now like gone on to other things. None of them are freelance writers anymore. I don't know any writers personally who solely work for magazines, who 100% of their work is magazines. I don't know any of those anymore, especially after, hi woo woo, especially after, you know, the past few years. Like magazines have folded, magazines have cut rates, magazines have changed how they work, magazines have stopped working with freelancers temporarily so they can, you know, save money. There's all these things that happen. So the people who solely work for magazines, I think, is a very small group now. And like 100% for magazines. Like they do zero working for businesses. They only work for publications. I think that's a very small group now. There are people, like I write a lot of content for businesses that could be published in a magazine. Like it's the same type of stuff. It's just for a business. And I really enjoy that. It's like basically the same thing I would be doing. I just get paid a lot better and it's more frequent. But you have to be careful with that. Like you have to be careful how many you collect and how, oh my goodness, how many you collect and how often you write for them, and then be more discerning. Like I have very particular magazines that I want to work with and keep relationships with and that I like. But I'm not pitching a ton of magazines right now because there's just, you know, so much is changing in the landscape and it's a lot of work. You know, it's a lot of stuff that you have to do sometimes for magazines. I see you, Woo. I see you. And it can be, you know, a ton of work where your hourly rate goes down, or here you go, buddy. Or you end up making a very low per word rate, or you know, it's kind of like a passion project that you work in. So you have to be careful when you're working for magazines, especially with rates and how your money's coming in, that you're not collecting like dozens of little checks. That is a very easy way to start burning out. You want to balance that. Even if you're doing 50% magazines, and magazines can be print or online, you're doing 50% working for businesses, at least there's some kind of balance in there where the businesses can be more regular, and then you can kind of add in the magazines as they go along. The other thing about magazines is they're a lot slower to pay you than a business is. So like when you start collecting a lot of magazines, these checks are like irregular. So when you get paid by them, it's not like net 15 or net 14. It can be like net 90, or it can be like 6 months later. It's really it's a tough landscape sometimes. So pay attention to that. That's something that's really important. It's not just about rate raises, and it's not just about the perfect time. There's no perfect time to ask for a rate raise. You just do it. And you have to be cautious about who you're taking on board your ship. Okay, Woo, I get it. Woo, come here. If you feel like this has been helpful so far, give it a thumbs up. If you feel like you want to learn more about building a high-earning freelance writing business or learn more about writing for magazines, subscribe. Let's do a quick update. Oh, and you know what? You can always put questions in the chat or questions below. So can you go back to your hobble hole, please? Go back to your hobble hole. All the way back. You can't just hop back like that. Good job, Barry. All right, Charlotte. Good job. Other one. Other one. Back up. Back up. Back up. You're like, I don't care. Here you go, Barry. You can always leave comments or questions below. I always answer them. So if you have asked for a magazine rate raise in a different way than what I've talked about, let me know in the comments. I'm always interested in new techniques or new things that you've used. And if you are currently working for a ton of magazines, or even working for a handful of magazines, let me know how that's going. I've been working for a few, but like I know some people have been working for a ton of them. So let me know how that's going. Let me know, you know, below in the comments. All right, can you go back to your hobble hole? Back up. That's the opposite direction of your hobble hole. There's only Tritos in the hobble hole section. There you go. Good job. Good job. Here you go, Barry. Barry, you look great today. Other one. Other one. She's like, I just did it. What are you saying? Other one. Good girl. Other one. Good job. Good job, Fuzz. All right. Cool. So I think those were all the main points that I wanted to make, but we're here every Friday. I do a live stream every Friday, and this was actually from Helen. So Helen recommended this topic. So if you ever have a topic or a question that you want me to answer in the live stream, you can always put it in at mandyellis.com/question. And if you're like, I need a question answered, or can you talk more about this topic, you can submit it here and then I'll talk about it. So today's was actually from Helen. So thank you, Helen, for asking. And this is, I think, a really important one that we don't talk about enough. So I'm glad that she suggested it. We're here every Friday. So, you know, every Friday I come in here with the furs and with myself to get some information. And yeah, I think that's kind of it. I think we're good. So I hope everybody has a good Friday. And I think we're going to end on a pup date today just because Charlotte's being sassy. So I'm going to wave bye, but I'm going to end on a pup date. So I will, I'll see everybody next Friday, and I hope you have a good holiday weekend. Bye. All right, go back to your hobble hole. Charlotte, go back to your hobble hole.